I'm Maggie, and I run the CAP program at U of C. So when CfA asked me to talk today, they asked me to talk about CAP, but they thought it would be interesting if I also shared a little bit about my story from how I went from being a policy student at U of C to working in tech. And to be honest with you, I sort of had to sit down and think, how did that happen? So when I traced my steps, I realized I think probably a lot of people here today have followed sort of the same trajectory. They've come across the same sort of problems and had to come up with the solutions in a similar way that I roughly will kind of in 1 minute try to tell you what happened to me. So in my case, I was an analyst, and I noticed there was something interesting. And so I decided to look into it. So I was told pretty quickly that there wasn't a lot of research, there wasn't a lot of data on this thing that I was interested in, and so it just wasn't really politically tenable to look and try to solve this problem. So being me, I said, well, what would it take to do it anyway? Like, what would it take to just test my hypothesis and see what's out there? So the first thing I needed to do was learn a little bit of R. And so I thought, well, that's not too hard, so I taught myself a little bit of R. And then I realized, oh, I need some data. Oh, there is no data, remember? So someone said, well, you could scrape some data. So I said, OK, how hard would it be to learn how to scrape some data? So I taught myself some Python, and I learned how to do that. Oh no, the data is really big. So now it doesn't run on the machine and the fancy model that I had constructed to run in memory in R. So now I had to learn how to distribute this across multiple machines, and I had to learn how to submit jobs, and I had to learn how to pay for that. And long story short, I had to basically learn a lot of CS in order to solve this problem that I wanted to solve. And a little CS turned into more CS. So eventually, I did get it together, and I tested my hypothesis, and turns out it was right. So now I needed to tell someone. So let me tell you what. Learning all of that tech was really hard. But what was even harder was trying to communicate what I had learned to a group of people who hadn't taught themselves all of that tech. And it turns out, once we got over that initial hurdle, my bosses had a lot of additional questions. Most of the questions that they had were things that I could only answer because I had come to this problem with a depth of knowledge of the policy area in which this problem sat. And it turned out that that mattered a lot. So that was very surprising to me. But when I was really trying to build this trust framework in the room of all of these people who had not just developed all this technology alongside of me, it mattered that I could guide them through the process and help them understand why it was appropriate to implement the solution that I was trying to implement. So I'm not here to go down the rabbit hole of talking about that particular problem and solution, because like I said, I think we all have something like that we've come here because it's inspired us given our experience there. What I'm here to talk about is basically to pose a new hypothesis, and that is that stories like mine are possible all over the place. The key difference right now between my story and everyone else's is that I happened to find the resources that I needed at the right time when I needed them to implement the next step in my process. And if I hadn't been so lucky at every step of the way, I would have just had to give up. I would have just had to stop. And I think this is what we're seeing in governments and nonprofits over and over again right now. We're seeing really interesting problems and opportunities getting somewhat stymied or stalled, sometimes for lack of having the right folks in the room, but sometimes we even manage to get the right people in the room with the technology background to solve the problem, but we're not able to build that trust framework so that there's the right buy-in to be able to move from idea to implementation. So I think that the core problem here is that the way we're training people to go into public service just hasn't kept up with the really ambitious goals that we've set for ourselves in 21st century governing over the past couple of years. So why don't we just try to reshape how we think about getting a policy degree? And that's what the CAP program is about. So the CAP program is about giving you the foundations that you would expect from a policy degree. So you're going to learn economics, you're going to master statistics, you're going to master how to navigate the policymaking process. But you're also going to learn to code. So this isn't like baby code. You're not going to learn, a little bit of how to run one regression. Like, you're going to know how to build the application that you need to know how to build in Python, or when to switch over to Hadoop, and how to build a database that you definitely don't have in some of these nonprofits that are just getting off the ground with a whole bunch of interesting data. So, this also isn't a program that's just about throwing out buzzwords. It's a program that's about, for the first time, putting public policy training and computer science training on equal footing. The point being, one is no longer an afterthought of the other for the people who are leaving this program. So I'm here to say that I think this is how we fill the talent pipeline. I think this is how we actually realistically meet our goals in 21st century governing. So I came to the University of Chicago to do this because since I was little, actually, the University of Chicago was a place that I thought people who weren't allowed to challenge, or weren't afraid to challenge the status quo, could call home. So that didn't just mean you had the courage to challenge the status quo, but you were willing to put in the hard work necessary to challenge effectively. It's just that now, in 2015, challenging the status quo looks a little different than how it has in the past. Now it means knowing and recognizing when it's appropriate to step outside of the comfort of purely academic research and really build things that are going to have a real-time impact on people's lives on an everyday basis and the decisions that they're making. So I would be remiss and probably in trouble from U of C if I didn't also stress that this isn't easy. These aren't skills that we can just sort of brush over. This is a program and a set of goals that we've set for ourselves that are highly ambitious. And so we really need to take care to cultivate how we train and develop the patience and the skill sets to navigate this new world. But I think we all know that this isn't easy work. None of us are here today because it looks good on our resume. Like, we left that world behind. We're here because we know that there's a real opportunity to do things better. And I think we know that if we put our heads down and, like me, we just learn the skills that we need to know as individuals to get from idea to implementation, that we can move the needle a little bit. But I think also as a group, if we start to work harder to sort of build the bridge between the public policy world and the technology world, then we can actually start to see real change happen. And building that bridge is where we're at right now. We just need to build it, we just need to do it, and that is what CAP is about.